When boyfriend and I first moved away from armpit to butt crack around 1996 or so, we moved into an apartment building that was really a huge house broken up into 5 or 6 apartments. A few days after moving into the top apartment, we discovered that boyfriend actually kind of knew the couple on the ground floor. As it turned out, boyfriend had graduated with the girl, a blonde with a crunchy by Miyazuma grams 80 sperm. Now, we didn't realize this at first, but she was a complete and total Brittany, and he was the male counterpart. At first, they seemed nice enough. We hung out a bit, and went out a few times to the clubs. I even helped Brittany get on at the place where I worked, telemarketing, but almost twice what minimum wage was at the time. It wasn't until we had lived there for a couple of months that we found out rather by happenstance that the couple had a rather extensive opioid habit. I was at work one evening, and I had a terrible headache. Brittany came to my desk at break time. We usually went to eat together, and asked me what was wrong. I told her I had a headache and asked her if she had any Tylenol. Well, no, but she had a painkiller. Turns out that she was talking about hydrocodone, and I politely declined it. Over the next few days she offered me a painkiller for everything from a tummy ache to being in a bad mood. That's when I started to catch on. As it turns out, Brittany and Brian's lives revolved around their pill problems. It was all they talked about. We didn't want to make enemies of people that we literally lived on top of, so we subtly started pulling back from the friendship. Eventually Brittany got fired from the job, and that's when the choosy beggaring began. They started out asking to borrow $20. We did it, and they paid us back. No problem. Next thing that happened is that they wanted to share their cable account. Since we were all in the same building we could run a line and no one would know. Their idea was that we take turns paying each month. Of course, we went first. I did not like this at all, but figured that if it went pear-shaped, we would have a legitimate excuse to get rid of them. The third thing that happened was that Brittany came to our door in tears. She said that Brian was downstairs, crying. She said that they had no food in the house, and that Brian's children were with them for the weekend and they were hungry. We weren't exactly domesticated then, so we had no food to give them. Boyfriend and I are soft-hearted, and we were kind of naive back then, so we lent them some money for food. I think it was $50 or so. The next day Brittany is back, and she's going on and on about Brian's pill issue. Not hers, no, it was all Brian. Sometime during the conversation, she says that Brian had made her lie to her parents and say they needed food for the children to get money for drugs. Boyfriend and I just looked at each other. We didn't say a word to her, but we were furious. A few days later, our cable was turned off. Since the account was in Brittany and Brian's name, we went down to their apartment to find out what was going on. They tried to cover it up at first by making excuses and hemming and hawing around, but it didn't take long to figure out that the bill hadn't been paid in over 2 months. We had given them money for the cable bill that month, but they spent it on something else. Gee, I wonder what. We ended up opening up our own account and they actually had the nerve to ask us to share with them. That's a nope from me, dog. They got very pushy about the issue and a few words were exchanged. It wasn't a pleasant conversation, but we finally had the excuse we needed to cut them off. The problem was that they would not leave us alone. They badmouthed us to other people in the building. They stole things from our cars. They called in noise complaints on us and sent the police to beat on our doors, waking us up at 2 and 3 am. There were a few other things too, but that was the final straw. I was just fed up. One night while watching TV a commercial for Voltrex came on, and I got an idea. As it turns out, the first few doses of the anti-herpes medication was free. All we needed was a name and an address to have free information and a voucher for free samples sent to your home. We dialed the number and sat back and waited. Now, I know the subscribing people to junk mail or dirty magazines is kind of a cliche, and we didn't really expect anything to come of it. What we had hoped for at most was a blow up of some sort. We figured that, if we were lucky, there would be a fight and some cheating accusations. Maybe if fortune really smiled upon us they would even break up. What we got was so much more. It was, in fact, glorious. About 10 days after we made the call, a huge ruckus outside got our attention. Brittany was in a rage. She was in the yard, screaming at Brian, calling him every name in the book. Brian was standing there haplessly watching as she threw his belongings into the yard. Clothes were everywhere. A TV and a lamp smashed on the sidewalk. Brittany sat in the middle of it like a blonde banshee in booty shorts, cursing and screaming at the top of her lungs. We were extremely gratified when she asked which of his feckin' hoss gave it to him. Eventually Brian lost patience and the two started brawling in the middle of the street. Beer bottles and gauntlets were thrown. A weave was snatched off. It was a scene fit for the Jerry Springer show. Eventually the police showed up, and Brittany and Brian were driven off in the city's free black and white cab service. They were taken to spend the night in the city's free hotel accommodations, aka the county jail. Apparently when the police intervened, the couple was found to be in possession of illegal prescription drugs, and a night in jail turned into multiple nights in jail. Imagine that. They never returned to the building and we never saw or heard from them again. For all I know, they are still in jail. When I was 13, I found out my dad had mistress. I said I'd rat him out to mom if he didn't buy me an account on some prom sites. He didn't want to give me access to prom even under the threat of exposure, so we compromised on buying me an account on a hentai site, which he didn't count as real prom. I accidentally left the hentai site open on the family computer one night and my mom found it at some point after I went to sleep. Since the content was being paid for, she apparently thought my dad was using it. The next day, our Google search history was full of stuff like help my husband is watching cartoon prom, and is it normal for men to like cartoon prom? Dad took the rap for the hentai without complaint, because the alternative was admitting that he bought prom for his 13-year-old son to cover up his extramarital affair. End of the story. Nope. A few years later I happened to be going through my parents' closet for something when I stumble upon a bunch of cosplay poop, a Hatsune Miku thing, a Mido costume and a school uniform based on Hiruhi, along with neon colored wigs and assorted anime inspired accessories like cat ears plus tail. So apparently my mom accepted that dad had a fetish for anime chicks and has been doing her to satiate his lust for second, and poor dad who has no fetish for second whatsoever, pleb, has to play along or allow the entire web of lies to collapse. TLDR, I ruined my parents' marriage with hentai. When I